Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Keith.
I appreciate you responding. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's good to see you all. I'm Keith Brooks. I'm part of the faculty development team. Welcome to a new season of Primetime at the BU Library. Primetime at the BU Library's mission is to encourage lifelong learning beyond the classroom for faculty, students, and staff through presentations that are a collaboration of many different offices on campus with the friends of the BU Library. Faculty, be on the lookout for research papers that your students can submit for the highly prized $250 Library Research Prize. The due date is February 15th. On Thursday, Angela Sabatis of Psychology will share humans as social and or selfish, competing perspectives. Today, we welcome Dan Rotach as he presents a talk about teaching session, What Did I See You Say? The power of the nonverbals in the classroom experience. I'm excited to hear what that is about. I'm sure that that's going to bless me as well. Can we welcome Dan?
So let me explain the visual for just a moment. It's our schnauzer, Lucy. I just finished a book, a beautiful book, called Pause and Effect, P-A-W-S and Effect. And the book is designed to point out that there are dogs, animals, who can sense what's going on in you before you know what's going on in you. Cancer, stuff like that. So, a number of months ago, my wife was grieving. She's sustained some losses in the last few years, and just one of those losses really got the best of her one day, and she was crying. And it was one of those rare times it wasn't my fault. She was crying, and Lucy comes up, rests on Judy's chest, looks her square in the eyes, and licks her tears away. Dogs are one of God's best ideas. I just believe that. So I decided to honor her by putting her as the visual on this talk today. A couple things that set the stage for what is basically a talk about nonverbal communication. I was asked to teach an online class, and I'm teaching it now. Michelle's in the class, and I told Michelle, I'm struggling. Because I love this. I love getting in there, mixing it up, seeing how that's landing or not landing with students. So Michelle and I were talking about just kind of, it's a little difficult. And I realize it's kind of the wave of the future. But I've got a friend, Pastor Sid Veenstra of Calvary Church, where we meet regularly to basically solve the world's issues. And Sid will never solve world's issues via email. He'll say, hey, I'll meet you over at Green Mill, or I'll meet you at Caribou. And I think he's onto something. I'll tell you why. John, writing to the church, says, I have much more to say to you, but I don't want to write it with pen and ink. But I hope to see you soon, and then we'll talk face to face. Interesting slant on not necessarily technology, but my wife, who's also a therapist, has done an incredible amount of research at what happens in the human soul, particularly in the soul of an adolescent who gets a text that says, I'm breaking up with you. There's no context to that. It's just bites of information, what that does to the spirit. So Judy and I were talking the other day about just some of the pushback, not of online classes, but of communication that's strictly bites of information. And you can't see into the eyes, and you can't see how this is landing. A couple things. I want to tell you 2-3 stories that set the stage even further for this conversation that we're going to have today. A couple summers ago, I was teaching a summer version of my class, GES 444P, Christians in Conflict. And as part of that class, we talk. There's a documentary I show called Fall from Grace it's the story of Fred Phelps and his organization. And I won't tell you that whole story, but basically, if you follow anything with Westboro Baptist Church, what they do is they go out to military funerals, and they protest military funerals. Maybe you've even seen them at different venues. Well, as part of the documentary, there's this illustration of a group of men who drive Harleys who go to these military funerals and sit outside and will crank up their Harleys just as loud as they can to drown out the protesters, to drown out Fred Phelps and his peeps at these things. So I'm teaching this, and I'm talking about this, and there's a young man sitting right in front of me who he starts to cry. And I'm thinking, okay, Rotach, once again you took it too far. You pushed this. And so I stopped and I said, what's up? You doing okay? And he starts to cry and he says, my dad's one of those Harley guys, and I couldn't be prouder. So the whole class just rejoiced. We broke into spontaneous applause. And I don't know how you had to capture that online, but it was quite a moment in the classroom. And I'm glad I stopped and said, are you okay? Another story. Teach a graduate school class on Tuesday nights, human sexuality and therapy. And we're getting ready to talk about therapy stuff and sexuality stuff. And I look over and I see one of my students very, very downcast, very sad. And I pushed through the, shouldn't I? I said, are you okay? And she says, we just put our dog down just a couple hours ago. I'm sorry, Dr. Rotach. I said, oh no, you don't have to be sorry. And then the class gathered around her and prayed for her. I'm thinking, once again, just the power of community and of paying attention. One other, and then we'll keep going. One of my students was, I don't remember what we were talking about, but she, I know what we were talking about. We actually, I don't think you still have this, Betty, but used to be a VHS in the library here called The Ugly Truth. It's a study of people who get hired because they're attractive and don't get hired because they might not fit the pretty picture, so to speak. It's a powerful documentary. But I showed that in class, and one of the things that happened is a young lady sitting in front of me, she starts to cry. So I stopped and I said, you okay? Is there something we need to process together? And she says, I'm one of those people who was told at my church, on the worship team, that I don't fit the culture. Now, I used a couple of non-Sunday school words. I won't use them here. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about, is being aware of what's going on around you, and whether it's a teaching venue or any sort of community venue, and being bold enough to say, are you okay? And we'll talk in just a moment the risk that can be. Because sometimes it fires back at you like, yeah, Dr. Rotach, I'm not okay because I totally disagree with what you've said the last 30 minutes. Now, I don't do Minnesota Nice very well, so I said, bring it on, let's go. Let's talk about things. So there's some risk attached to all this. I love this particular teaching. It's an example of Jesus. You can't go wrong with bringing the Jesus card in. You just can't. Amen. But here's the deal. In Luke chapter 7, and you know the context, a woman from the streets, prostitute if you would, crashes this dinner party held by Simon. And there are about 7 or 8 different cultural rules that were broken. But it's interesting. When the Pharisee, who was the host, saw her coming in, saw what was happening and who the woman was, he said to himself, remember that, he said to himself, Simon, this proves that Jesus is no prophet. If God had really sent him, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. She's a sinner. Look at this. And Jesus spoke up and answered his thoughts. Whoa. That's not a good day when a prostitute crashes your dinner party, and you got somebody who says he's the Messiah reading your mind. Fascinating. And I love the exchange that's going on here. He says, Simon, he said to the Pharisee, I have something to say to you. All right. And then he goes on and tells the story about forgiveness. The one who's been given a lot, experiences a lot. I love how it ends. Look at the dynamics, the kind of the verbal and nonverbal dynamics going on. Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, keeps eye contact with her, and says to the woman, and says to Simon, this was a no-no. You didn't lock eyes with prostitutes. You just didn't. But he is saying to her, to Simon, look at her. Look at her. It's interesting. He says, look at this. He just say, look at this prostitute. Look at this whore. Look at this woman in the streets. Look at this woman. I love the exchange. I love that all the stuff that's going on around here. Usually what gets airtime is the forgiveness teaching, and it is a forgiveness passage. But I just love the way Jesus modeled not just eye contact, but some really, really powerful dynamics. You don't have to jot all this down. I was asked to speak at a convention not too long ago on I was assigned the topic of how to do community in a Facebook, instant messaging, texting, emailing world. That's my topic. And what I did in preparation for that talk to these leaders is I went through all of the alleloms in the New Testament, the one another, and jotted them down. And I'm amazed at how many of them really require what we call the ministry of proximity. It just requires you be there. Greeting one another. Forgive, I suppose you can do that email, but devoted to one another. There's some more. Wash one another's feet. Just all kinds of stuff that hints at a couple of things. One is, as we move into an age where more and more information is exchanged electronically, just remember that's all it is information. Or as my wife says, you're only using half your brain. There's a whole other half. There's other half brain things she's told me, but this is being recorded. There's some fascinating studies out right now on how much real communication needs to happen in the ministry of proximity. Last year, folks, it was my privilege to do this, talk about teaching. And I told the story, we were talking about the ministry of proximity and how you all in your venues are much more effective if you step out of the classroom and become incarnational with your students. It's risky. But I told that story. I told this story, and I'll tell it to you again. But on a Tuesday, which is the day I teach class, one of my football players came in and says to me, "Thanks for going to the game." And I said, "Chris, there's like a gazillion people out there. How do you know?" He says, "We know. We know he's there." And I just about ruined the moment by saying, "Well, I go to all the games." But I think there was something going on there where he was saying it just meant a lot to him that his human sexuality professor was also at the football game. Small stuff. But who knows what can happen in this whole thing called ministry of proximity. And I used this quote last year. I'll use it again. Howie Hendricks, who I think is still alive, says, "You can impress people from a distance, but you can only impact them up close." And again, you can't go wrong with Jesus. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. Beautiful incarnational teaching from the Message saying, Jesus just didn't keep his distance and say, "How you all doing? By the way, Rotach, I love you." He got in there and mixed it up. So, in preparation for this talk, I read a ton of articles on nonverbal communication. Everybody has a different percentage of how much is really how much communication is really happening non-verbally. One study, which was in Wikipedia, so that doesn't count, said 93%. But I read some other articles that said, there's just a really good chance that very, very little communication happens until the right brain kicks in and helps you process what's the context, what's going on here. Well, I put my dog down today, Dr. Rotach says, that's what I'm trying to get at. And years ago, and I'm not going to tease each of these out, but here's, I think, help me out, Barrett, who wrote Blessing? Townsend? It's kind of old school book, but Cloud and Townsend maybe, but they got us thinking in terms of recovering some Old Testament stuff of blessing each other and saying, can we bring that into our everyday relationships? And I read the book I can't remember, and the authors I can't remember, but I remember thinking, I wonder how much of this would transfer to my world, not just as a therapist, because it gets weird when you have meaningful touch as a therapist, so that's not what I'm saying, but how much of this could be really a part of who we are as educators and as administrators and as people who regularly get to speak into students' lives. So then I put some other stuff together and realized, let's have a conversation, and we will have a conversation in just a moment. How long? What's this go to?
11. 5 to 11%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Again, at the risk of drudging up a bunch of studies, I think you all knew before you got here that a huge part of communication is nonverbal. And what I want to do is empower you for the next few moments to quite honestly do a couple things that I've done, and this has helped me. If you want to do them, that's great. And if you've got suggestions, I want to hear them too. But one of the things, I'm not saying we do this every time, but what will really help is to, as you're in this venue, in this community, in this system, whether it's a classroom or whatever, is to emotionally exegete it. Now, we all know what exegesis is, and that's pulling apart a Bible verse and saying, what's this mean? What's this not mean? I think we can do the same thing in systems, whether it's classroom or whatever, saying, what's going on here? I remember I began thinking through this kind of language when I was asked to speak the Sunday after 9/11. It was like 9/11 10 years ago. And I had my nice little sermon here, and I thought it was pretty good. But I looked out to this crowd, and I said, this doesn't fit. This does not fit. 9/11 was on a Tuesday. I had mistakenly thought, by Sunday, they'll be ready to wrap their mind around something else. No. So I had it on my feet fairly well, mostly because I gave them a time of silence. Prolonged silence, which is what I teach my preaching students. Like, if you don't know what to say, just give them 23 minutes of silence. No, but I did. I just said, it seems like you all need to decompress. Some of you are angry at who you don't even know who you're angry. So we did, and I remember. I didn't even use this language at the time, but I remember thinking, as I look out here, it seems like something else is going on, and I need to pay attention to what's going on. people have said, but that's easy for you because you're a pastor and you're an educator and you're a therapist. I said, no, I got to work at this too because I kind of like to get through the lesson. I mean, I like to get through this. It just happened today. I mean, at my 8:55 class, our football team lost Saturday. And a couple of football players come in. I said, what happened? And they explained defense, they were running. If I'd have just gone ahead with the lesson, I would have missed the opportunity to say, well, as long as you beat St. Thomas, we're fine. just don't mess that up. So, emotionally, actually, whatever context you're in, it just makes a lot of sense to sit back and say, what's going on here? Seems like spirits are downcast, or it seems like there's something going on here that needs to be processed. And I can recall I teamed up with Jim Koch and Jay Barnes and Dr. Brushhopper and others when Equality Ride came. And this is 5-6 years ago. And I remember going into the classroom post-Equality Ride. And I had my neat little lesson about something else ready to go. And I looked out and I said, these 22 students aren't ready to talk about something else. They want to talk about what just happened on campus and how they're processing. So that's what I mean. Just emotionally. Paying attention to this, what Murray Bowen calls the emotional force field of the classroom or of the venue that you're in. Stop here just for a second. Any experiences where you paid attention and get paid off? Somebody told their story. Somebody said, oh, thanks. Anything like that. I don't want to be the talking head. Got a story? Anybody? Ferris Bueller? Anyone? Okay. All right. Bennett? Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to point out something that doesn't have to do with the classroom, but you know how Deb Harless just sent us an email with the record enrollment and all the things people did face-to-face or by a phone call. It reminded me of the book Megatrends.
Yes.
Of the phrase that high tech, high touch.
Yes.
And we've been focusing on our website, the entrance, whatever. And to me, could have made one of the factors of our enrollment is there was a lot of high touch.
There you go. Proximity stuff. Yeah. I think that would be a huge part of it. One of the things are increasing enrollment. Megatrends. That's been around a while, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I remember reading that. This is risky. I'm not going to lie to you. I wouldn't anyway. But if you see a student who's really checked out emotionally, and you fight through the should I, shouldn't I, and you say, are you okay, huh? And no, I'm not actually. Just got an email. My dad's leaving my mom. Now you're involved. Now you got to at least set aside and say, can we just right now pray for you? This sucks. Can we just bring this? Yeah, please do. Now, my classes lend itself to that. If you're teaching like statistics or something, I got nothing. I don't know what to. But my classes lend themselves to being a little bit more incarnational earlier. But just be aware that if you're going to start paying attention to some of the dynamics going on in your classroom, there's a certain risk. And the risk goes both ways. Like I said earlier, in last semester, we were talking in Christians of Conflict and about issues of bias and racism. And I look back and there's one of my students in the back row, very red, very angry. Okay, I got a choice here. I can either push ahead to the next little bullet point on my next little PowerPoint or say, how's this landing with you? She says, not very well. I want to go back to what you said 20 minutes ago because I totally disagree with it. And then another student says, yeah, and I do too. Okay? Now, I personally love that. I love that mixing it up. But it's risky. It's kind of risky. Okay. Plus, I was right anyway. I told her that. It's so simple. But play this out for a bit. One of the things I tell my preaching students is, please know your sermon. Please know it, so that you're not so that you miss what might be going on. And I tell my preaching students this story about eye contact. 4 or 5 years ago, I was the interim pastor at Elam Church, Northeast Minneapolis. And they have a ministry to the homeless. And it's not just an attachment to an already busy church life. They are passionate. They are passionate about the homeless. Homeless guy named Steve comes to Christ under our watch there. Shows up each Sunday. Doesn't smell very good. Sits up in the balcony. Those who've been to Elam, they have an awesome balcony up there. Sleep if you want. But he's up there. Steve doesn't sleep. I found out because he told one of the staff people that he lived for me to make eye contact with him. In other words, it was a good day for him if I would stand behind my pulpit and I'd look up and I'd just do this, and he would do that. Why that was so powerful for me and for him, I have no idea, other than there's something really powerful about eye contact. About knowing your stuff well enough and knowing your culture well enough to say, excuse me. Power of story. This is up for grabs. Some people think professors and professor types ought not to be self-disclosing. Take a risk. Tell your story, because it'll probably hook in to their stories. It'll probably give your students freedom to say, whoa, can I? In fact, in human sexuality class, I was really waxing eloquent on the nonsense called ring by spring, as I want to do in that class. And one student noticeably upset. And she comes up to me after class and says, I'm one of your students who ring by spring. I got married when I was a junior. And I apologize for being so abrasive and so direct. But then I invited her. I said, how'd you like to tell your story? Next class. She says, can I? I said, yeah, as long as you don't counteract everything I've said. She said, I won't, but I do disagree with a lot of what she said. And I said, fine. So, next class, she gets up and tells her story of how she disagreed with some of the teachings around ring by spring. It's risky. I'm not going to lie to you. It's just kind of risky. But the power of story, yours and theirs. And I've been, in the last few years, doing a lot of work with Leonard Sweet. He wrote a book that I just finished not too long ago called The Gospel According to Starbucks. And he talks about how people really will pay, what's French roast, $1.59? $12.59. Yeah, and I'm there 3 times a day, so do the math. But he says, what you're really paying is experience. You're paying for the experience of being around. The smell is good too. I'm not kidding you about that. But he said, the way Sweet says is all the rules of communication are changing, and the way people change is changing. Now they aren't necessarily all amped up about hearing you talk for 55, 60, 70 minutes. They want an experience. They want to participate. They want to weigh in. Image is huge. Lucy, image. and community and connection and all of this stuff that I think is here to stay. One of my critics said, it's just a fad. I said, no, it's not. We will never go back to the days of linear. We just won't. We're thankfully embedded into a system that says, hey, I want this to be an experience. I want to participate. Please slap up a YouTube video up there. I mean, please let me connect with others in the class. So these are the things that I want. Talk to me. Anything land, didn't land, clarification, rebuttal? I disagree with everything you said. What's going on? What's in your mind? A story, a parallel, illustration, anything that makes sense?
Will you talk about more of how you do that emotional exegesis in the class?
Sure. 10 minutes? Okay. Here's one thing that sounds real noble. I show up early. I just sit. I don't like to be able to say, I go around and pray for every... No. I just kind of get a sense. Watch the students as they come in. We lost a classmate a couple weeks ago, and I got there early and just watched the students as they heard and found out. So mainly just showing up early. There's not I don't know if there's a skill set to it, but there's just an awareness of saying, I wonder what's going on here. Not, do I need to change my strategy for the day, but at least the first part of the class is, how y'all doing? Showing up early has helped. That's why I'm on that. I've been married 30 years. The thing we fight about the most is Judy says, why do you need to be early for everything? I said, because I'm emotionally exegete. So we went to see the Eagles in concert in St. Louis 2 years ago. Flew to St. Louis, saw the Eagles. The Scott Trade Center probably holds 28,000 people. We were among the first 8. Judy says, when's this going to stop? I said, honey, we're here to get the vibe. There's nobody here. Janitor isn't even here. Showing up early helps. Barry?
I absolutely agree with you about face-to-face versus emails and stuff, but I think it's important not to discount the power of simply answering emails as a form of acknowledgement.
There you go.
I can't tell you how many students write on evaluations at the end of the semester. You know, when I sent an email,
She actually responded. Yeah.
So I'm thinking, well, what is everybody else doing?
Yeah.
But
That's a good call. That's a good call. In fact, my son sent me a text the other day, and it says, you're pretty. I said, texted back, I said, thanks. He says, oops. I didn't mean for that to go to you, Dad. Yeah, just responding back. Good call. What else? Kicking around in your hearts.
Well, you tried to undercut this, but I'm going to come back.
The online stuff. Okay.
No. You obviously have a high emotional IQ. And it's been my observation being part of the Academy for a number of years that emotional intelligence and other forms of intelligence don't necessarily correlate. And so I think the challenge of emotionally exegeting the classroom is a more significant challenge for a lot of professors, and I think you've been willing to acknowledge so far. So
okay.
I just want to challenge you
That's
on
a good
that
call.
because I think that there's a number of reasons, whether it's because people just don't know how to read a group the way you read a group, or because people have an aversion to doing that. I mean, so I think maybe, if you want to push that, you've got a potential agenda for faculty development. I mean, because I think people really need help in how to do that.
I think so. In fact, Michelle, are you the one that arranges all this?
Anna and I do.
Okay. Maybe next time. Yeah, maybe, how do we do that? There could be some. The implication is I've got it all figured out and I don't. I'm gathering information as I go along. Humor. Incredibly emotional exegesis. Not the Sven-and-Ole stuff, because that's just not funny. But, okay. Yeah, next time around maybe we'll tease that out some more. Okay. Are we good? 2 minutes? Okay. Cue card over here. Peace sign? Okay. Yes?
How often do you get a negative response from students when you ask them, you know, if you notice a student having a bad reaction to a lecture and you say, well, let's talk about this. How
Right.
often do you get somebody who says, I don't want to talk about this in front of the class, or just responds?
Not a lot in class. I get a lot out of class.
Oh, sure.
Can I talk to you afterwards? We'll walk out the parking lot and you'll explain.
Sure.
And again, this sounds noble, but at the very beginning of the semester, particularly in human sexuality class, I'll say, okay, folks, there's this umbrella of mercy over this whole room. Any question is allowable. Any discussion is allowable. And you won't agree with me, but let's have a discussion about it. So I at the beginning, it sounds cheesy, but I really do. And there'll be times in class, I'll say, remember, umbrella of mercy over this whole place. That seems to help. Okay? I'm going to pray. Can I pray? Do you do that? This talk about teaching? Stop laughing, Scott. All right, let's pray. Lord Jesus, help us in each of our venues and each of our places of leadership and responsibility to be incarnational. To be just like your son, who got in there and mixed it up, who paid attention, who reached out. Help us to be those leaders who really pay attention to what you're doing in the classroom and in the community. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. Thanks, guys.